That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
The British Constitution provides that taxation and representation shall go together. Therefore, women taxpayers are entitled to vote.
I have a dream today. Let freedom ring, and if America is to be a great nation, this must become true.
Hello and welcome back, or welcome to Only Human. We're starting something I've really been looking forward to today, and that is a book review series where we're going to go over 4 or 5 books that have actually changed the way I view the world. And we're going to come around to the one I chose to start with here in just a minute. But kind of as a preview, I wanted to give you a look at some of the books we're going to be talking about. One's called The Logic of Failure. It's by Dietrich Dorner from the Max Planck Institute. Fascinating book. We'll bring some lessons from there. A book many of you probably have not heard of. It's simply called Awe. And the subtitle is The New Science of Everyday Wonder and How It Can Transform Your Life. It certainly gave me some things to think about, and I think about awe all the time on my own, but really a good piece of work here. We're going to go to Daniel Pink, who's a researcher on the brain, actually a highly respected scientist, in a book called Drive, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us. Great book. We're going to cover that one. This one's a maybe, but it's a really good book. It's by Denise Cummings, and it's called Good Thinking: 7 Powerful Ideas That Influence the Way That We Think. One of my favorites, absolutely guarantee we're going to cover, is a book called Loon Shots by Scifi Bachal. And subtitle is How to Nurture Crazy Ideas That Win Wars, Cure Diseases, and Transform Industries. And then, of course, no book review series would be complete without this one. ISO 9000, The Quality Systems Handbook. Nah, I'm just kidding. We'll throw that one away. We're not going to do that one. We'll probably finish up with this one. It's called The Warrior Ethos, and it's by Stephen Pressfield. Fantastic, short little book. You can read it in about an hour. But we're going to go through all of these books. But today, we're going to start out with a book that, 40 years ago, fundamentally changed the way that I view the world. And I'm a science fiction addict. And one of the very first books I read cover to cover and then reread it cover to cover almost immediately was a book called Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert Heinlein. And so that I thought was appropriate for where to start our book series. Why it's important today will become apparent, and why it ties into everything that we've been talking about on the last couple of podcasts about living in this crazy, complex, sometimes unforgiving world that we're in today. So let's go ahead and get started. I want to start with an overall quote that I thought sort of captured it. We're going to use a lot of the quotes here, and I'll get to the overall plot line of the book here in just a second. But here's a quote, and it's from Michael Valentine Smith, and he is the central protagonist of the book. And it says, "I am free because I know that I alone am morally responsible for everything I do. I am free because I know that I alone am morally responsible for everything that I do." And I think that's a powerful statement on the kinds of things we talk about here on Only Human: self-awareness, accountability, responsibility, personal growth. And I think it ties into a whole host of other things that we're going to plow through today. So let me jump to a little bit of an overview of the book. And then we'll go back to another quote. Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert Heinlein tells a story of, actually it's Valentine Michael Smith, not Michael Valentine Smith, Valentine Michael Smith. And it's timely because he is actually born on Mars, right? With all the stuff going on with Elon Musk saying we're going to go to Mars. His whole dream has been to grow a rose on Mars before he dies. Actually predicting that he'll have a lander on Mars within 2 to 3 years. By 2026, late 2026, he said most recently. So maybe that happens, right? So maybe late this decade, we have people living on Mars. And in this particular case, these were the first people to live on Mars. And there's a husband and a wife, and the wife gets pregnant and has a child, right? And that child is Valentine Michael Smith, the first and only child to be born on Mars. First mission to the planet, right? So here's what happens. They find intelligent life there. And then in a tragedy, his parents die, and he's raised by Martians, right? So this alien race teaches him their highly philosophical, very ritualistic worldview. And it's centered on a term that's also become more prominent these days called grokking. 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 We're going to talk more about grokking, but basically it's a deep, holistic understanding of something, right? Internalized, interconnected with everything else. Goes well beyond understanding, well beyond comprehension. And so that's who he is. And he lives there for 20 odd years. And by the time he's in his mid 20s, we finally get back to Mars. And then we bring him back to Earth. Right? Stranger in a Strange Land is a story of Valentine Michael Smith returning to Earth, completely unfamiliar with human culture, human morality, social norms, societal norms. And the book is about his journey to understand humanity. And in many ways, it's Heinlein's personal take on how we might all better understand humanity. And so Valentine Michael Smith wants to teach Earthlings what he learned from the Martians. And it serves as a pretty powerful metaphor for adaptability. And in this crazy world that we live in today, I think if you're not adaptable, if you're not flexible, it can be pretty hard to live in it. So here's the second quote, and it's about grokking. It says, when they first ask him, why do you keep using this term? We don't get it, right? And he basically defines it in one sentence. He says, grok means to understand so thoroughly that the observer becomes part of the observed. Understand so thoroughly that the observer becomes part of the observed. So we could talk a lot about that, but what I took from that is if I want to understand what someone else is thinking, and back then, just so you know, I was in my early 20s. I was co-captain of my college basketball team, and I was looking for ways to better lead. One of my very first leadership positions, right? And when I read that, the observer becomes part of the observed. The word that jumps out at me now, not then, is empathy, right? So not only do I understand how somebody's feeling because they're not getting enough playing time, or they didn't get a pass when they should have got a pass, or why they're not playing as hard a defense as you know they're capable of playing, or whatever it is that I was dealing with at the time. In order for me to understand that, I had to almost become them, right? And so I had to grok what was going on. So that's kind of the central idea. Let's jump into some of the things about adaptation and communication and cultural norms, and kind of relate them to some of the real world challenges that we face as American citizens or global citizens, as members of our family, as professionals in high-risk fields, aviation, law enforcement, healthcare, et cetera, and see if we can find something in this framework for exploring how we can improve our performance by understanding ourselves, our situation, and others more deeply. So segment one here, I guess, would be adapting to a new environment. Right? Smith comes back from Mars. There's a big party, welcome first child born on Mars. I mean, the whole world goes crazy about this guy. And they ask him a lot of questions. And initially, he's extremely introverted. Right? He'll sit sometimes for 15 or 20 minutes in silence before he answers a question. And that's why they finally get to this idea of grok, because he has to internalize all of this. Not only what does it mean, what does the question mean, but what does it mean based on his entire life experience and everything he knows, everything he feels, right? So growing up immersed in this Martian culture where he learns to do that, to deeply understand something at almost a spiritual level, he has to deal with Earth, where we operate on a, hey, I ask you a question, can I get an answer, please? A faster pace. And where he's into this sort of deep understanding of not only himself, but how he relates to the collective in the Martians' world, he has to adapt to a world that prizes individualism, right? And power and ambition, and that has rigid social norms. So his very survival here on Earth depends on his ability to learn, to question, and to integrate these new rules while still trying to grok, deeply comprehend what's going on. And along the way, somebody asked him a question about, hey, would you rather be on Mars? You seem very uncomfortable here. And his quote is pretty insightful. He says, you can't go home again because home has ceased to exist except in the mothballs of my memory. Right? It's kind of reminded me of that quote, you can never step into the same river twice. What I think he was saying there is something we can all take to heart, and that is, no matter how many times you've experienced something or how familiar you are with something, everything needs to be respected for its newness. Right? You want to stay in the present. You know, when I think about this, I think about the brother of somebody that I have as an acquaintance. I met and I've had several opportunities to talk to Senator Mark Kelly, the astronaut, and now he's senator from Arizona. We worked together on some things in the past, and his brother, twin brother, Scott, spent nearly a year aboard the International Space Station. And he described what it was like coming back to Earth, all the noise, all the people, all the physical interaction. He said it was extremely disorienting. And so that's just after a year, so kind of imagine never having seen that before. Having to adapt to new realities is something that we all need to do. Whether we're coming into a new role, my son just left the Air Force, had his Finney flight in C-17s yesterday. He's going to work for an airline. And he said, Dad, I'm just not sure what to expect. I said, you won't until you get into it. And I talked to him a little bit about reading this book. So culture shock is something that we can't let shock us, right? We just need to go into it like Valentine Michael Smith and grok what we can about it. How did he do that? He was extremely curious. And eventually, he sought a mentor, right? And the mentor in this book is a guy named Jubal Harshaw. Jubal Harshaw. And he's a really cool guy, man. You just grow to think of him. I would have liked to almost seen a spin-off book. But Jubal is a retired doctor, lawyer, and a writer, right? Very eccentric dude, man. And despite all of this expertise, he has a disdain for working inside of societal norms. He prefers just to live a life of leisure, supporting himself through his writing, which he makes a lot of money off of, which range from writing pulp fiction to nonfiction essays. And even though this Jubal is an intellectual, he's extremely witty, extremely sarcastic, and he's fiercely independent, which makes him an ideal voice to be mentoring this introverted human being that sees the world through a completely different cultural lens, right? And he's the voice of critical thinking. He's the voice of skepticism. And he can, right along with Valentine Michael Smith, he can challenge the absurdities of some of our societal norms and our hypocrisy. Right? And in the book, he lives on a secluded estate. He's got a loyal staff who respects him and protects him in all his eccentricities. And his home becomes a sanctuary, right, for his ability to mentor. So as a father figure to Smith, he helps him sort of navigate all of Earth's complex and contradictory norms. He teaches him about human culture and law and morality, and he tries to protect him from people who would exploit him, right? By this time, Smith has been referred to all over the world, the man from Mars, and everybody wants a piece of him, right? And in one of their early discussions about a moral dilemma, he has a great line. And he tells Valentine Michael Smith, the best way to handle a moral dilemma is to avoid it entirely. And that sort of really bothers Valentine Michael Smith because he doesn't want to. He feels obligated to work through these moral dilemmas. And in itself, that statement's a contradiction to who he is. And it takes him a long time to process and grok that, right? How can he or should he avoid moral dilemmas? And I think it's important that as this mentor, he serves as a counterpoint to the idealism and otherworldly perspective. And while Smith embodies this transformative potential of a Martian philosophy of communalism and understanding each other, his mentor provides a more grounded, skeptical approach, right? And so between the two of them, they really sharpen each other's critical thinking skills through a lot of debates and discussions that happen inside the book. I think the three things that come out of his mentorship is that we all have freedom of thought, that humans are often hypocritical, and that there's a balance between logic and emotion. And as humans, we are driven more by emotion than we are by logic in many cases, right? And just a couple more quotes from the guy, get to a feel for who he is. He says, it's amazing how much mature wisdom resembles just being too tired to care about something, right? And he goes further on in this idea of wisdom, says about 80% of wisdom is just not butting into other people's business. Okay? From that, Smith begins to learn about boundaries and respect for the opinions of others. And the last quote I'll give you that I think frames his mentorship is this one. Men are so made, they can resist a sound argument, but they yield to a glance. And that's that emotional component over the logical piece. Somebody could tell you all the reasons why something is, but you show them a picture or you incite them, you get to their emotional stage, and we lose all of that sound judgment. So that's kind of his commentary on human irrationality, I guess is the word. So the second thing I want to jump on here is the importance of communication, right? Important for all of us. The Martian philosophy is that communication is about a lot more than words. It involves a deep understanding, an active listening, even though the Martians, they talk, but they don't talk. They also have telepathy. And most importantly, the contextual awareness about what's going on inside that discussion, right? Their language, the Martian language, is so precise that misunderstanding is nearly impossible. Right? And now think about the way that we communicate with LOLs and OMGs and short text and two-sentence tweets or X posts, Instagram. Nothing it seems designed to clearly communicate anything. Right? Eventually, as Valentine Michael Smith becomes more out there, he has a quote where he says, "You really can't teach a man anything. You can only help him discover it within himself." And that idea of self-discovery through a deep understanding of not only what you believe, but what others might believe about what you believe is essential in tying this into kind of real world stuff. When we go out there with training classes, for example, I'm going to teach a crew resource management class to pilots here in a week or two, and I can give them a whole bunch of really good things to know, but unless they prove it to themselves, unless they can convince themselves of the validity of this, it's just words, or at best, what I call inert knowledge, unusable knowledge. So how we communicate more precisely is critical, but more importantly, how we can encourage and motivate people to give it a try, to discover it for their own, right? I don't know where I stole this quote from, but hearing it 1,000 times is not as valuable as living it once. That's kind of what Valentine Michael Smith was trying to get at. The next area that I think is really cool out of this book is this whole thing about cultural norms, right? Challenging assumptions. And I guess on Mars, if I remember this right, their view of life, death, community was different. All of these things were just naturally integrated, right? There were no funerals, no celebrations of birth. It was just all part of the great cycle of things, right? And initially, when Smith begins to see the rituals and the cultural norms of Earth's taboos, right, it forces him to confront the bias that even though he believes the Martian way is a better way, here he is in this new world, stranger in a strange land, and he has to come to grips with it. And in one particular scene, they're there saying, well, this isn't the right thing to do. And they're saying, yeah, but everybody does it. It's a custom here. And he has a great line. He says, customs, morals, is there a difference? That's a question that I've thought long and hard about, is if we've adopted a custom that may have elements of immorality to it, no matter what it is, think of any hot button issue of the day. If we've allowed a societal norm, a custom that's immoral, are we not somewhat obligated to challenge it? At least in Michael Smith's world, he was, right? So, think of things, I guess historically you could think of, people like Rosa Parks, who decided, hey, I'm not going to sit in the back of the bus anymore, right? And challenge society's norms because the norm was immoral. Or, the abolishment of slavery. Or, in today's world, we could look at all of the human trafficking that's going on and lots and lots and lots of people not doing anything about it. And a few people that are doing something about it. And you can say, how do I feel? What could I do? What is my role here? Beyond saying, I'm aware of what's going on. Right? Which leads us to the final little segment here I want to share with you, and brings us full circle back to this idea of self-awareness and empathy, which we've talked about a dozen times here or more. The the Martian philosophy that Smith espoused was that we're all part of a larger whole, right? And therefore we should always be humble, and we should always be feeling for what others feel. He declared in one particular thing when people were telling him how wise he was, that he was only an egg. I'm only an egg. And that reflected kind of his belief that no matter what stage of life or death he was in, he would always be growing and learning. And as long as he had that thought, that meant he would be able to connect deeply with others. I want to learn about you. I want to learn about your situation. I want to learn what you believe. And I think that idea of humility and avoiding what we've called before the expert's curse, thinking we already know everything, prevents us from getting cynical, or a term I often use is hardening of the categories, where we can't change our mind, right? And it allows our mindset to shift to become more of a sponge, right? And I think that's hugely, hugely important. So we'll wrap this up in just a second, and I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but the book ends very controversially, right? He eventually, he doesn't, but around him, a new church and religion is formed, right? A fusion of this Martian philosophy and human concepts of, I don't know what, love and community. Right? And when he starts to become too popular, you can probably guess what happens. A growing opposition from Earth's established powers, right? Religious leaders, governments, politicians, even the general public, who becomes manipulated into seeing him as a threat because he challenged societal norms about things like morality and spirituality and individuality and communal living. So I'll give you one little spoiler. Eventually, he's got all his protectors around him. There's an angry mob out there, and they're saying you can't go out there. There's too much danger. He doesn't attempt to resist at all. He walks out into the mob, and they kill him. And so from there, the book gets even more interesting, but I'm not going to give that part away. So I think there are some basic core lessons that we can take out of Stranger in a Strange Land. First is you can get wisdom from anywhere, or there are a lot of things out there that change you. And Heinlein changed me back many, many decades ago by teaching me a new way to think about things, right? Key concept, adaptability, right? Embrace change, learn from unfamiliar environments, learn from people that don't think like you. How do you do that? Second core lesson, communication. Don't just fire back an answer, especially if you're in total agreement or total disagreement. Take time to grok it, right? The reason you might have heard that term lately is that's, I think, Elon Musk's new AI program, which kind of is anti-grokking, if you ask me, if you're having some machine do some thinking for you, right? So adaptability, communication, bridge the gaps with what? Clarity, and seeking to stay with that communication long enough to create a mutual understanding. Even if that doesn't mean mutual agreement, but now you know how I feel and why, and now I know how you feel and why, we can move forward. So the third thing, cultural awareness. Norms, customs lead to biases, and we have to be able to be aware of those. A classic example is the aviation maintainer that goes out there and he's told on day one of the job, I know what they taught you at school and the things that you learned in indoctrination, but here's how we do it on the line, right? And that young man or woman has the ability right there to either go along with the rest of the bubbas and become part of a set of norms that might not be fully compliant, might not result in full airworthiness of an airplane or something, or they can take the time to think about that and say, am I going to buy into this or not? And what does it mean to me? What does it mean to me as far as who I am, my own personal responsibility and accountability, and how I'm going to react inside this culture that I am now in? And that leads to the fourth and final of the core lessons, which is self-awareness and empathy. The whole idea of where we're at and how we're interacting with outside forces that are trying to shape us and mold us and direct us is hugely important. And it comes through loud and clear in this book over and over. And even if especially if we decide we're going to buck the system and not go along with it, we have to learn to do that with humility and with a constant effort to change the things that aren't operating as well as they possibly could for the better, whether that's from a morality standpoint or just from an efficiency standpoint, because our goal as part of a larger system is to make it better, not worse. So I guess I'll finish this up with a quote, and I'm going to expand on it just a little bit. The quote is this, and it comes from Valentine Michael Smith. It says, "Love is that condition in which the happiness of another person is essential to your own." And throughout the whole book, this idea of personal success is present and stays present. Right? The individual doesn't disappear inside the system, but the idea of improving the system adds to the success of the person that's improving it. Right? So when we get to the point when we realize that the success of someone else or something else is absolutely essential to our own personal success, then we've kind of grokked the meaning of this whole book. So I would leave that sort of as a call to action. Think about how you are integrating where you are, whether it's with your family, with your friends, your golf foursome, or your company, or the world at large. How collaborative are you? How much are you trying to make them better, right? The system better, the world better, because in so doing, we're making ourselves better. So when we talk about Only Human and our connections and our impact on the world, I think sometimes we can draw lessons from some really strange places. And I just thought I'd take us on a quick little journey through a book that taught me some of those lessons that I've tried to apply for the rest of my life. So where can we grok more deeply? Whether it's a colleague's perspective, adapted to a new leadership role, or just questioning one of our long-held beliefs. I'd like, if you've got some feedback on this, fire me an email or social media handle, anything, I'm out there in a lot of different places, easy to find, where we can expand on some of these ideas and thoughts, possibly even for future episodes. Well, that's a wrap here on episode 60, milestone for us. And I look forward to jumping into some other books here in the near future. I'm trying to figure out which one I might do next, but I think I just need to do a little more thinking until I grok it entirely. Appreciate your time today. Hope you have a great week. We'll drop every Tuesday, just like always, 9 a.m. Eastern time, and I will see you soon.